so I'm just going to start off. How many of you have been certified before? Yeah, 3 or 4 of you. Okay, we'll go through again. We'll go through the certification today. I would ask that you fill out the white sheet. I think we've got it passed out to everyone. So there's a lot of information on there. Basically, we need your name and we need an email address. I will enter this information today and send it to National BQA, and you will receive a certificate and a BQA number by email. So however, whatever email you would like to use for that, that's how you'll receive your certificate, because we keep a local list of Wyoming producers that are BQA certified, but it's a national program and it's a national ID. And the benefit to that is if any company requests to know whether or not you're certified, it's through the national database. So you're listed in both, and it's important to be on that national database. So make sure you fill that out, and especially the email, and I will get that submitted today by the end of the day, and we'll get you certified. So we're going to go through BQA certification, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, and hopefully we'll kind of work our way through this. What is BQA, Beef Quality Assurance? I think it's important to think about BQA as a voluntary program. It's not a mandated program, and we'll kind of talk about the importance of that, but it's basically a voluntary program. It was started, or the concept or the idea of it was started in the 80s, based on some reports and some complaints from packers about injection site issues on cattle and some residue issues. And so it started in the 80s. The first BQA program was started in the 1990s. Wyoming is one of the first states to have a BQA program. Many of you probably remember Pat Swan. Pat was our BQA coordinator for a few years. I came in 2001. 2002, I started doing a lot of the BQA training for the state as well. But it's a program. It is producer driven. So it was based off of some feedback that we needed to correct some things in our industry, and it's producer driven. It's a quality control program. We'll kind of talk about how we address that through prevention and through management practices to try and address some of these issues as we go on. And I think it's important to remember that it's education based. It's not mandatory. However, as we see, as we're moving through the industry, we'll talk about some examples, but we see more and more encouragement and requirement from within our industry to be BQA certified, and that's probably why many of you here. We know that our major packing plants are requiring that cattle that arrive or that they receive be BQA, coming from BQA certified feedlots. We know that our semi-drivers now have to be BQA in order to deliver to the plants, as well as to work with many of the feed yards. They have to be BQA certified. And so it's while it's not a mandatory program, it's still voluntary. We're seeing some industry emphasis on becoming certified. And so the real idea with it is we're trying to protect and build some consumer confidence in our product. So we'll kind of talk about that as we go through. Here's kind of the mission statement of BQA. It's to maximize consumer confidence in and the acceptance of beef by focusing on the producer's attention to daily production practices that influence the safety, wholesomeness, and quality of the beef and beef products that are produced. So hopefully what we talk about today, hopefully there are many benefits to BQA. The main aspect that we really focus on is safety and wholesomeness of the product that we're producing, as well as consumer confidence in the beef that we're trying to market. So that's really the emphasis. I think a lot of what we talk about are all research-based information that's going to improve production. It's going to improve overall herd health. It's going to reduce stress. It's going to reduce bruising, a lot of those inefficiencies. So there's hopefully economic benefit to doing this as well. But the big idea is that we're trying to enhance consumer confidence, and we're trying to enhance the safety and wholesomeness of the product that we're producing. All right, so here's kind of the timeline. Again, we talked about this a little bit. A lot of the BQA programs were first established in the 1990s. We used to have our own Wyoming manual. Now we've adopted basically every state has a different manual. We've tried to become more uniform and consistent, so we all work off of this national manual now. So all of you should get one, and if you don't or you want to take another one home with you, you're welcome to do that. Everything that we'll talk about today is essentially found in this manual. It's a pretty good resource to have. The training is available online. So if you have new employees or somebody wasn't able to be here today, These trainings are available online. I can show you that. It's at bqa.org. You can go do those trainings as well. A lot of that information is available. But I think this is kind of good information to talk about, and I am more than happy to go around and do trainings around the state. I do trainings for large operations, feedlots, stock growers groups. I've done probably more trainings this year than I've done probably in the last 5 combined. A lot of people, there's a lot of momentum to do this. The nice thing is a lot of different programs that are out there, all of our packing plants, a lot of our retail, I guess, marketing approaches, all of them, fortunately, are all uniformly using BQA. So the nice thing is we don't have all of these different brands using a different quality control program. Fortunately, as an industry, we're all using BQA and we're all adopting BQA. So that's a really nice thing that we have from an industry standpoint. Again, it's in 47 states. The idea is that we're trying to enhance carcass quality. We're trying to prevent residues in meat. So we'll talk about antibiotics and antibiotic use and following withdrawal times before that animal is transported and marketed. We talk about eliminating or reducing pathogen contamination, addressing biosecurity and herd health issues as we go through, and avoiding carcass defects. Carcass, by this we mean any type of foreign objects. It can be anything from remote dart needles. It can be birdshot. We'll talk a little bit about that. But it also can be broken off needles. It can be bruising. Bruising is probably our #1 issue as far as carcass defects, and all of those bruises have to be trimmed, and it's an inefficiency to our industry. And basically, we want to maximize consumer confidence, as we talked about, and talk about beef management practices. Why is it important? It demonstrates not only within our industry, but it demonstrates to the consumer that food safety and quality is important to us, and making that known to the consumer is pretty important. It's good from a public perception standpoint. I think really the thing that I like to talk about from BQA is it's a really good example of us as an industry recognizing a problem, and in our case it was with injection site depletions and some withdrawal time issues. We recognized it as an industry in the late 80s. We began addressing that in the 1990s, and so through a voluntary program that's education-based, we virtually eliminated injection site problems and residue problems in our product through a voluntary program that's education-based. So in my mind, it's a very good demonstration to any government entity that wants to create more additional regulations for us as an industry. This is a prime example that we can address our own problems. We can fix them on our own. So I think BQA, if anything, is a very good example of that and how important it is. And again, as we've mentioned, hopefully some of these practices are not only important to the consumer, important to us as an industry, they'll help build herd profitability as well, because they're based on good, sound scientific information. Why do we do trainings, or why do we have to go back and recertify all of the time? That's probably an issue. I know I get questions about that, especially when somebody realizes that their certification has lapsed and they want to be recertified, within the hour, if at all possible. That happens on occasion. Why is it important to recertify? Well, I think it's good to hear the information. I'm station director at Legal. I require all of our staff to go through CPR certification every 2 years, mainly because I'm highly accident prone. I've only been hauled to the emergency room twice. Both success, I'm back, I'm still here. But we do require CPR training, and that has to be renewed every 2 years. I think of it kind of along those lines. It's not bad information to be reminded of. Plus, it's an opportunity for us to talk about maybe some of the current industry trends, make sure everybody's kind of current on some of the thoughts and some of the issues within the industry. And so that's why we believe it's important to continue to recertify for BQA. It's also an opportunity to bring new employees, or maybe people that are new to the industry, and kind of expose them to what some of our challenges are, how we're addressing these, the bigger picture from an industry standpoint, and how we address some of those things. So we know there's a lot of issues from out there, the perception of beef production, right? I feel like sometimes we've got a target on our head, and that we're easily targeted by a lot of the activist groups that are out there. And so hopefully what we do and what we talk about in BQA can address some of those consumer confidence issues. It can give you some ammunition to defend your operation, to defend your industry if you're asked about it. All of these things are important to think about as we go. My oldest son has been interviewing with a lot of feedlots. He's interviewed at Cactus Feed Yard. He's got 2 interviews next week with some of the 5 Rivers feed yards from Colorado to Texas. And it's interesting to talk to them how important and how consumer confidence and confidence in the product is, how it is important to them as well. It's important to their livelihood, and it's important to us from an industry standpoint. So this is a little background. This is kind of a dated slide, but we know that in 2019, really the game kind of changed for many of us. Wendy's and a lot of the major retailers are requiring BQA certification, but we know that Cargill, Tyson, and JBS Swift, all 3 of those are requiring BQA certification for cattle that come in. They're also requiring that the trucks hauling those cattle are BQA certified. So there's kind of momentum within the industry because we see these large feedlots that supply cattle to the packers. If they're having BQA certified cattle or they're BQA certified themselves, they like to source cattle that are coming from BQA certified operations. So they're working with stocker operators and backgrounders that are BQA certified, cow-calf producers that are BQA certified. So there's kind of some momentum for this BQA certification as we go. And we know that a lot of those major retailers, whether it's Costco or Walmart or Sam's Club, all of them are requiring this as we move forward as well. Unfortunately, they're requiring one program, BQA. They're not creating their own program or pulling something from the dairy industry or the poultry industry. They're willing to use beef quality assurance as a tool to provide that consumer confidence in their product. All right, so beef quality overview. We know that we're focusing on a couple of things from the consumer standpoint. Oops, I went too far. Product integrity. We want to know that it's safe and wholesome. But we're also concerned about eating satisfaction. And so hopefully the practices that we talk about from a BQA standpoint enhance eating satisfaction as well. So not only do we want to provide to the consumer a safe and wholesome product that they're comfortable feeding to their family, but we're trying to provide a product that they have a good eating experience and they want to come back for and buy. We're the most expensive protein on the market, but that's hopefully it's worth it to them. It's worth having a good steak on the 4th of July, right? Hopefully that's what we're trying to instill in the product that we're producing. So this is kind of an older slide, but I think it really drives home the point of why quality is important. This is a slide looking at marbling, or the amount of intermuscular fat, or the quality grade of that carcass, and the overall eating experience for the consumer. So this is quality grade, or marbling, or intermuscular fat across the bottom from least to most. This is traces. This is slight, which would be select cattle. So anything below select is what we call traces, or if you got a feedback from a packing plant, you'll see steers. Hopefully you don't see any steers mark this, but it'll show up as no roll. So anything that is grade select or lower, they don't want graded because there's a cost to them for grading that carcass, and if they're not able to market that as select or better, they ask that it not be graded. So most of the traces type beef is no roll type of beef. Slide is traces. Small degree of marbling is low choice. Average choice, high choice. Slightly abundant marbling is low prime. Moderately abundant is average prime. So as we work up that scale and more marbling, you see these are percentages or percent good eating experience. We know that we get up to average choice, and now we've got a pretty good chance of that consumer having a pretty good eating experience. So we know that marbling isn't necessarily directly related to tenderness, but we know that marbling is related to a good eating experience because marbling provides that juiciness and flavor to our product that we're eating. So that intermuscular fat provides that juiciness and flavor and that overall eating experience. So that's why we continue to focus on that, and we'll talk about reducing stress. We'll talk about managing health. All of these things can influence and impact quality grade. So many of you know when I started giving these talks back in the early 2000s, we were looking at, from an industry standpoint, about 55% of our cattle grading low choice and better. Where are we at now as an industry? Anybody know the most recent? We're easily 80% choice, low choice and better now as an industry. So we made dramatic improvements. How did we improve it? Probably through management to some extent, hopefully. Genetics, quite a bit, probably through genetics. We've made a lot of selection, and we've got genetic tools now that help us make some of those decisions. Ultrasound, I'm a big ultrasound guy. We like to use ultrasound as a selection tool. All of those things can influence that as well. But hopefully we're talking about not only safety and wholesomeness, but we're talking about product quality, getting that consumer to come back and buy it again. In addition to that, we do every 5 years an internal audit. So NCBA and its contracts out and works with a lot of the land-grant universities to do industry audits. I've got a couple of examples. You're welcome to look at them. There's 2 of them, but they're old, and we're in the process of doing another one. So these are 2016 audits. Basically, we have 2 audits. We have the fed beef audit, which is our steers and heifers under 24 months of age that we typically market. That's our fed beef audit. And then our non-fed, which is our cull cows and bulls. So both of these are audited. These are 2 different series of packing plants in our industry. So any fed beef plant typically does not harvest or process non-fed cattle. So these are 2 different plants. So those are contracted out, and not only do they go to the plants and do audits of the plants, but these beef quality audits include interviews with cow-calf producers, with stocker operators, with backgrounders, feedlot managers, packing plant leadership, consumers, retailers, all of the way through the whole industry. They're interviewed, and we're looking for ways to improve our industry and things that we need to focus on. So this is kind of our success story, and this is a dated slide. 1991, 22% of cattle had some form of an injection site issue. In 2001, it's less than 5%. In 2016, it's less than 5% in 2001. 2016, it's below 1%. So we've made dramatic improvements in that. We still have a few. I don't know when to talk about some of my pet peeves, but we're still getting some shots in the hip, which is where a lot of those come from. To some extent, how many of you are in the dairy industry currently? Nobody? We still give some shots in the hip in the dairy industry because we've got a lot of dairies that still have head catches, or their cows are in the milking parlor, and really the easiest access to that animal is in the hip. But they've made great improvements in that area, and we continue to improve in it. So we continue to look at that. Certainly the dairy cattle would fall into our non-fed market to some extent. So 2016, what are some of the results of the audit? More prime and choice carcasses than ever before, and at that time more yield grade 4s and 5s, which means additional or maybe over fat animals. I'm pretty sure we're probably moving away from that trend based on corn prices right now. This was back when corn prices were in the $3 range. We're looking at $8 corn right now, so I don't think cattle are fed as long or will be fed as long right now. So we're probably moving away from that, but we have improved prime and choice carcasses pretty dramatically. We've seen big jumps and big improvements in our export market in the beef industry. A lot of our exports are prime carcasses and high choice, average choice and up carcasses. A lot of our high dollar exports are in that area, and we continue to see a demand for that in our industry. Bruising, we'll talk about bruising, but we continue to have issues with bruising. We reduced some of that by removing horns. The number of horned cattle are down considerably now, but we continue to see problems with bruising. We think it's probably related to increased frame size of our cattle to some extent. Our trucks really haven't changed that much, but our frame size and our cattle have changed. So loading and unloading trucks may cause some bruising. Facility design might be some of that as well, as we see increased size of our cattle. I know we've got a snake at our research station, and it was built for a certain size, and now we've got some of our mature cows, when they go through that, they hit their tail head on it. When they go through some of those kind of issues, I think, are something we think about. Production practices that negatively affect our visceral, our ability to market our liver, and some of our offal. As we move forward and we lose the ability to use some of our antibiotics, some of these types of things are going to be affected, and we're probably going to focus on BQA or management practices to address those. And we still have to some extent, people not within even our industry, not recognizing BQA and the importance of it. So some of the things we continue to address. Things that have been addressed are mobility and downer cattle. We'll talk about that. That's a part of BQA. Body condition scoring and injection site issues continue to be a problem. But I think the important thing to think about as we talk about this, BQA was started talking about where we gave shots. But BQA is so much more than that now. We've got a cow-calf manual, we've got a stalker manual, we've got a transportation manual, we've got information on how to manage downer cattle, we've got information on humane euthanasia, or how do we put down animals humanely. We've got information on all of these different things on biosecurity. All of this type is now kind of under the umbrella of BQA, and so we provide that information and those resources through BQA. We talked about some of those concerns as we move forward. We'll keep going. Lots of different defects that still exist out there. Toured the packing plant, or the cow processing plant in Idaho, just outside of Boise. Their number one issue was bird shot. Now, that's a cow plant out there. A lot of those cows are being sourced from Utah and Idaho and Montana. I don't know quite what's happening, but their number one issue at that plant was catching and recognizing and finding bird shot. They've got magnets at every stage in their processing facility trying to pick this out and trying to find them. But those are issues. But we continue to look at some of these issues, and we'll talk about some of these as we go through. Total quality management principles. The idea behind BQA is that it's much easier as an industry and as an operation to address it from a preventative standpoint. If we can address it through how we manage these cattle and catch some of these things early on, it's much more economical to address them as a preventative or early in this phase before it becomes, or that steak hits fabrication, or if that steak ever hits the consumer's plate, right? So hopefully we can address it through management, through prevention as we go. Our guide that we passed out kind of focused in these main areas. We'll talk about feedstuffs, feed additives and medications, processing and treatment and records, injectable health products, and animal care and husbandry practices. So that's kind of some of the areas we'll talk about briefly today. A lot of that information is in your manual, but these are some of the things that we talk about as we go through. We'll kind of talk about animal health first. We know that in many cases we used to ask for, through BQA, that every person that's certified, we used to have a form that was that validated a veterinary client-patient relationship. The idea being that you worked, maybe not exclusively, but you worked primarily with a local veterinarian, and that veterinarian, through repeated trips to your operation or working with you repeatedly, has a better understanding of your operation, has a better understanding of some of the challenges that you may have, and maybe can make better recommendations on vaccination protocols or antibiotics that help you more effectively treat or effectively address your own herd. And so South Dakota still requires that signed affidavit. I think South Dakota is maybe the only state that still requires it. But we do encourage that. It kind of has happened to some extent with the veterinary feed directive. Many of you do now have to work if you have any type of feed additives or buy any type of prescription antibiotics. You're working probably exclusively with a veterinarian. But the idea is, can you develop that relationship to make more effective decisions on the herd health programs in your cattle? Just an example of the form. We don't require that anymore, but it is kind of an important thing to think about. Probably an issue that we think about in the industry, or in the health industry, is antibiotics and what antibiotics we have at our disposal or what we can use. We used to have a lot of products that were available over the counter. We don't have very many of those now. Sulfoboluses, LA200, we don't have a lot of products that we can buy off the shelf. Most of those are prescriptive type products that we have out there. And we'll kind of talk about it, but as we move forward, we see kind of tighter regulation on what products we have available to us. The other issue is we have fewer new products being developed for us to fight disease and to fight some of these types of things. And so judicious antibiotic use, using the right product to treat the right disease at the right time, all of these things are important to get still effective response to these antibiotics that we have available to us. We'll talk about extra label drug use. Basically, if you are using that product off label, you need to work with your veterinarian in order to do that. An extra label can be many different things. Extra label drug use can mean a different dosage. You're giving it at a different treatment level than is indicated on the label. That's extra label. It could be a different route of administration. Maybe it suggests that you give an intramuscular shot and you're giving an IV. Hopefully not, but that's it. That's a different route of administration, different frequency. Maybe it says only treat after 72 hours and you'd end up treating it at 48 hours. All of these are examples of extra label drug use, or maybe use it in combination with another product. If you're working with your veterinarian, that's fine, but part of that discussion is withdrawal time. So if you follow it according to label, we know exactly what the recommended withdrawal time for that product is before that animal is marketed. If we go off label or extra label, now we've increased the dose or we've combined it with another product, now we no longer are confident what that withdrawal time is. So we like to make sure you're working with a veterinarian, and some of that discussion is what a recommended withdrawal time for those products are. We also know that extra label drug use of some products is illegal. So we know we need to work with our veterinarian in order for that to happen. One key is any feed grade antibiotics, and we still have an opportunity sometimes to use that, aureomycin or CTC crumbles or some of those products that we used to use. Those are products that we still have to have a script through the veterinary feed directive. You have to have a script to use those top dress type products. You cannot use any feed grade antibiotic extra label or off label. They all have to be fed according to label for feed products. All right, so take a look at the label. So here's a prime example. That's about how easy it is to read, even on the label of the product, right? It's almost impossible to read. But on the label of every product is all of this information, what species it's approved for, the approved uses or the approved diseases that it's been approved for, foot rot, bronchitis, whatever it is, the dosage required, route of administration, whether it's sub-Q or intramuscular, storage requirements, withdrawal times, and all of this type of information is available on that label. So in a lot of cases, maybe you've lost the label off of that product or you don't have that information. So one of the recommendations is one of the tools that is available is, it's available online. Take a look at the label. Let me get out here. I'll get to it here if I can get my mouse to work. There's a website, it's called the Compendium of Veterinary Products. Compendium of Veterinary Products, it's called CVP. This is a website that's currently hosted or currently managed by Elanco. It used to be managed by a different pharmaceutical company, but now this is a website that you can type any product in and it will give you the label and all of the information on it. So for example, maybe we wanted to look at Baytril. It will list all of those products that are available. Here's the injectable. You can click on it. It gives you all of the information, the active ingredient, dosages, withdrawal times, species. All of that information is available on this Compendium of Veterinary Products. So this is a free website that you can use. It is also available as a phone app. So if you look up on whatever type of phone you have, Android or Apple product, there is a app that's called CVP, Compendium of Veterinary Products. The same exact thing exists on your phone. It will pull up any product. It has all vaccines in it, all antibiotics. It has the common names. It has the active ingredient name. All of that information is available, and you can go on there and you can pull up any information if you're curious about whatever the dosage is, if you're worried about withdrawal times, any type of thing like that. The CVP, Compendium of Veterinary Products, is available as a phone app. I would encourage you to look at that and consider it. Yeah.
So us using ivermectin for COVID, that's extra label.
Yeah, that's probably extra label. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to work with your veterinarian, not your doctor, on that dosage probably. Yeah.
Veterinarians too.
So that's out there as a tool. I think it's a pretty handy tool. Withdrawal times, a period of time that an animal must pass between the last treatment and when it can be sold. So we're trying to avoid residues. And you know, anybody that's been to a processing or packing plant, we know that a certain percentage of those cattle are railed off and they're tested throughout the day. Probably 1 to 2% of all cattle are railed off. It's a challenge to them, but they're required by all of the people that are, you know, whether it's Walmart or Costco or whoever, they want that quality assurance on the product. So they are randomly testing cattle as they come through it. The challenge to them is the head separated from the carcass, the gut pile is separated from the carcass, the hide separated from the carcass. Somehow they have to bring that all together for that individual animal that they test and keep it all available and test. And they do it to 1 to 2% of cattle that go through the plant every day. It's a lot higher percentage, you know, I do a lot of county fairs and state fair, and they do about 10% of those cattle. They do quite a higher percentage because they're concerned about these types of things. So again, making sure we're avoiding that and addressing that withdrawal time is pretty important. I think in many cases with growing cattle, it's not as big of an issue, but sometimes I think with our cull cattle, we often will, maybe we've been treating a cow, we see an opportunity to run her to the sale barn, and maybe we forget maybe the last time we treated that cow or when she was last treated. I think that's an issue we have. I know we run into it at the station. We'll have cattle with brisket or high altitude disease. I'll have somebody treated for respiratory disease a couple of times before they realize that it's brisket disease. Well, now we got to hang on to that animal for 45 days before we can market that animal, even though we know what's wrong with it. So recognizing that is a pretty important deal. Not going into it today, vaccine versus antibiotic, because I think my audience obviously knows a lot of this, but in many cases we have to, especially I run into this when I'm explaining to people what a natural program or an organic program is. You know, natural programs, those programs, vaccines are certainly something that you can use. Vaccine is a preventative. It helps us prevent disease, right? Versus an antibiotic. All of these things are kind of important to make sure we understand and that we can communicate to the public when we do these types of things. The other thing we talk about is modified live versus kill vaccines. And I think everybody understands this better than we used to, but we used to have a pretty big discussion about modified live. My only talking point about this is we know that a modified live vaccine is basically taking a vaccine that has a live pathogen or a live virus that's been attenuated or it's been altered so that it still creates an immune response in the animal, but hopefully does not create the sickness in that animal. But we get a much higher immune response, a much higher reaction to that with a modified live than we do a killed vaccine. But the challenge with a modified live is that it's a pretty fragile deal, right? So any modified live is where you've got the air dried or the froze dried vaccine in one bottle, and you've got the sterile water in the other, and you mix the two for that modified live. Anytime that we mix a modified live, it's got a pretty short shelf life. We'll talk about it, but anytime we mix it, we probably need to use it within an hour after we mix it because we want it still to be potent. We still want to get the response out of that vaccine. So don't mix it all at once. If you're going to brand all day long, don't mix it at 8 o'clock and still be using that batch at 2 o'clock that afternoon, right? The other thing is we talk about keeping all of your syringes in shade or not in direct sunlight. That can affect modified live. And the other thing is if you are giving a killed vaccine and a modified live vaccine, a lot of times at brandings or even at when we receive cattle, we'll give a 7-way, which is a killed vaccine, and we'll give a modified live, which is our respiratory vaccines. We don't want to mix those two syringes up because the carrier of that 7-way is toxic to a modified live. So if our 7-way barrel we've been given shots with 7-way all day long in this syringe, and then all of a sudden we load it with modified live, we've probably killed the modified live vaccine in that syringe, and we're not getting any benefit out of that vaccine in that gun. So we recommend a lot of ways how to color code. So all of these you can buy different knobs of different colors, so we keep our vaccine straight. I know some operations that buy electrical tape of different colors, and you can actually wrap the barrel in electrical tape, and now you've fixed your sunlight issue as well. That's a concern. Yeah.
Steve, another suggestion, something we do, is my wife has a label maker.
Mm-hmm.
She just puts modified live on some syringes.
And they're always.
Nobody has to wonder what color is what.
Yeah.
That's another option.
That's a good option. You bet. Yeah, I think all of those things work. You know, we talk about how do we keep them out of direct sunlight. You don't just lay them on the table or lay them on the post or put them on the dashboard of the pickup. So we've got all of these fancy coolers now. I've got the $400 one here and the free one, right? We can all make one ourselves if we want. This is just the free styrofoam that came with a vaccine delivery, and all I did was cut 3 holes in it. I lined it with a piece of PVC, and now you can just put them in. They're all at an angle. They can sit in here. Again, if I use this in Wheatland, I usually put an 8-pound weight in it just so the wind doesn't blow it away in Wheatland, but anything like that can help. I put a little handle on top, but anything we can get it out of direct sunlight, we can keep it at the correct temperature. All of these things work pretty well.
Something else, instead of an 8-pound weight, if you have some ice packs you can throw in there, you've got some weight and you've got refrigeration too.
Yep. Yeah, so I think all of these things work pretty well. The one caution I give everybody, and I found this out the hard way, is a lot of us still have the old Rouse syringe guns like this, and they don't work very well with this cooler, because the first thing that hits when you drop it in the hole is the handle, and you just shot 2 mil or 5 mil at the bottom of that container. So making sure it works correctly. It works fine on here. These work fine over here, but just kind of paying attention. Those little details is kind of interesting, but yeah, it took a while to figure out why I thought I was giving the wrong dose until I realized about half of them were going in the bottom of my cooler until I figured out what was going on. But you know, these are just opportunities to, you know, through BQA or through, you know, all of this, talking about how we use vaccines, how we monitor some of these things. All of these things are pretty important. I've got a list of, we won't go through all of this. I'm trying to keep it short for you guys, but how we handle these products. I've had, you know, if you've got a fridge out in the shop or out in the processing barn, hopefully it doesn't look quite like that one, but I've seen ones that look kind of like that. And making sure it's still at the correct temperature, so that you're not freezing those products, that they stay around, you know, around 35 degrees if at all possible. Making sure that fridge is still working correctly. I've had that called the most expensive piece of equipment on the property, because if you put $5 or $5,000 of vaccine in it, for whatever reason it shuts down or quits you, that's a pretty expensive mistake, right? So all of those things, don't keep your stuff on the dashboard if at all possible. You want to keep it at the correct temperature, all of those types of things, right? I've got a list of things to remember when vaccinating. Following label directions, using BQA guidelines. If you give more than one shot on the one side of the neck, to try and separate them by about 4 inches or about 1 hand's width, if at all possible. When you clean those syringes, use very hot water. We recommend just very hot water, because a detergent or a chlorhexidine solution can also affect a modified live as well. So if you just use very hot water, 180 degrees or hotter, clean that syringe at least 3 times. With hot water, that's kind of what we recommend to clean those syringes. And certainly allow it to cool. Using needles and changing your needles, we'll talk about that in a minute. Keep all vaccines out of direct sunlight. Color code, we talked about that. Do not administer more than 10 cc of the product per injection site. So that's kind of difficult when we've got some products where you get a little bit more. The LA200 was the worst. On a mature cow, you had to give 60 cc's. And melt the cow, you're making Swiss cheese out of that cow before you get them all doctored, right? But those are kind of some things to think about. Mix only enough vaccine to be used in 1 hour or less. Choose the correct needle. We'll talk about that. Observe withdrawal times. Keep your records on vaccinations, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But those are all kind of things to think about. Talked about the coolers and different coolers that are out there. Injection site management. So this is kind of where BQA started. So we've used these slides for a long time, but I think it doesn't hurt to go back and so kind of remind us of why we're doing this. So this is an example of somebody giving a shot, and this is a top round. So this is somebody giving a shot in the hip. This is an old CSU study that was done in 1995. But basically, they gave 2 mils of the 7-way in the hip to this calf at branding time. These steaks were harvested, and that animal was slaughter weight, so that steer was probably 16 months old. So we're talking well over a year after that shot was given. The injection site blemish is still showing up in that round. So that's basically that animal. We gave that vaccine, 2 mils of a 7-way. That 7-way, I don't know if any of you have ever accidentally given yourself some of that 7-way. I tell you what, your finger or your leg or your hand gets about that. It's nasty stuff. I mean, it causes quite a reaction. it causes, that animal is basically responding to that vaccine, or responding to that 7-way by basically walling it off. That's basically some cartilage just trying to wall off that area and minimize and encapsulate that vaccine. So not only does it affect that steak, but it's going to affect a lot of the meat surrounding it. And that's kind of what we're trying to talk about here, is maybe we give that shot in the top round. We know that that part of that roast or that steak is going to be maybe impacted by that. But the other thing to think about is that entire muscle probably reacts to that vaccine. That entire muscle is probably responding to that vaccine. So we know that we have affected the tenderness and the eating quality of that steak up to 4 inches away from that vaccine. That's pretty much that entire roast. So we're not only impacting that direct area where that vaccine was given or that injection exists, but we're infecting that entire muscle. So the idea of how important that is just kind of carries on. Just some pictures of some different needle tracks. We'll talk about how important it is to change needles if you're giving, especially if you're giving intramuscular shots. Continually change that needle, but this is basically just that needle track showing up in those different muscles all the way through. Different routes of administration, sub-Q. I like to look for products. Obviously, we want to use products that we know work on our operation. But finding those products that are labeled for sub-Q, I like to do that as well. I like to follow the label, and I like to use products sub-Q when possible. So using those products that are labeled sub-Q, I think, is important. But products we're labeled on all of those. Oral products, intranasal products, all of those exist. Making sure you follow that route of administration. So we like to say only 3 locations a needle can be inserted into cattle, either in the neck for our sub-Q and our intramuscular shots, in a jugular vein if it's IV. And we still have some products, not only implants, but we have some antibiotics that we can give at the base of the ear as well. But those are the 3 main areas. When we talk about why we give that shot in front of the shoulder, here's just kind of an example of that. Here's that animal, here's the front shoulder. So we know that is a muscle group there, but that's probably a lower value muscle group. It's not going to be made into a steak or anything like that. But that's the area where we want to get that shot. And that triangle is important because if we go too low, now we've got a chance of hitting that spinal cord. If we go really low, we'll get into the jugular vein, right? We don't want to do that. I've seen some wrecks, but we don't want to hit that. Obviously, we don't want to run that needle into the spinal column or anything like that. That's obviously hurts the guy giving the shot. It makes you cringe. That animal probably doesn't like it either. So we don't want to go too low. If we go up here, that's the nuchal ligament. That's the ligament that holds the head up and controls that head. If we get too high, we can irritate that nuchal ligament and cause an irritation in that animal. And now it's hanging its head at about a 30-degree angle. We don't want to do that either. So kind of just for those people, I know we've got brandings, we've got processing crews, just making sure they're all comfortable with where they're giving that shot and why it's important to really focus in on that triangle is pretty important. All right, we've kind of talked about that already. Route of administration, we talked about that. From a needle standpoint, the recommendation is either 16 gauge or 18 gauge needles. So if you're buying them, it's the white hub needle or the white sheath or the green sheath needles. Recommendation is that a 5/8 to 3/4 inch needle for sub-Q shots. Recommendation is 1 inch to 1.5 inch for intramuscular shots. I do not like the 1.5 inch needles, just because I've never had any luck really keeping one last more than about 3 head. So I tend to go with 1 inch needles for any intramuscular stuff and 5/8 to 3/4 for sub-Q. Clean your injection site. So we talk about single-use needles. So when I was working at the beef unit, and this was back when rocks were soft, back in the late 80s, working at the beef unit, we had anaplasmosis go through our herd. And so we had to change needles on every single animal. And we had about 200, we had almost 300 cows at that time. And you got good at using disposable needles and changing them. We're not asking everybody to do that, but we do recommend that you change needles probably every 10 to 20 head. The idea being that most of our syringes, just about everybody is using some type of syringe like this. These are 50 cc barrels or 50 mil barrels. So if we're giving a 5 mil shot, that's 10 shots out of that. If it's given a 2 mil, that's 25. So the recommendation is once that's empty and you have to go back into the bottle to refill it, let's change our needle every time we refill it. For a couple of reasons. That kind of reminds us to change our needle. The other is we've got that active product in a sterile environment in that bottle. And if we go in with a dirty needle, now we've impacted that. So we'd like to go every time we go into that bottle and fill our syringe, go into it with a clean. So that's kind of the recommendation on that. Certainly we've got some pictures of how dirty needles get and things like that, but really that's just kind of the idea. We do it not only to try and prevent or eliminate those needle tracks that I showed you earlier with dirty needles. A lot of times you would see knots on the side of an animal sometimes. That's probably happened when we processed and we gave a sub-acute shot. I like to say that it doesn't impact the carcass quality at all, but we see those knots on the side of the animal. I like to say it's evidence that that animal was vaccinated. That's not a bad thing. And that knot remains with the hide. It doesn't affect the quality of the carcass that's with it. But it is an example of probably using a dirty needle. Just about every time I asked somebody about that, they were processing or working cattle when it was wet and muddy. And I think that's when that happens a lot, when the hide is dirty or the hide is muddy and we're giving shots. We'll talk a little bit about remote delivery darts. Anybody use those? We got into a pretty good discussion about this last night, but there's quite a debate within BQA of whether or not they're appropriate and the issues with it. And we kind of go around and around about the remote delivery darts. There are obviously benefits to them. This is an example that was done. This was done at the Meat Animal Research Facility in Clay Center, Nebraska, where they had a bull that they were going to euthanize. They shot the bull 6 times with 6 different darts. Out of the 6 darts, only 4 of the 6 penetrated the bull. Only 3 of the 6 darts administered the full 10 cc dose. One of them only administered about 2 cc's and then fell out. And the other 2 darts ricocheted off and were lost. So the concern that was brought up during that is, especially when we're using some very valuable vaccines, if we're giving a shot with some of these products out there, it's about $70 to treat an animal. Making sure that animal gets the full dose is pretty important. We've got to give multiple doses. Sometimes it's hard we can shoot that animal once, but then they start to get a little shy. You can maybe get 1 dart in them, but more than 1 dart is a challenge. I think there's challenges, there's benefits and challenges from any indication. But, using those responsibly, using them in hopefully a manner that's not going to cause a problem later on, I think it's important to think about when we do this. Here's kind of the worst case scenario. This was a series of pictures that were sent in by one of the coal cow plants showing a remote delivery dart that's completely embedded in the muscle. So there's the head of the dart, and after they went in and trimmed it, the entire barrel of that dart was inside that muscle. So I don't know how much they jacked up the compression on that or how close they were to the animal or what would cause a situation like that. I think any of these things, there's probably positive benefits to using them, but there are also opportunities to misuse them or mismanage them or do some of those types of things. So probably we make those decisions and make the best choice that we can in those situations. Feed regulations, we don't talk much about this because we used to talk about keeping track of all of that, but with the veterinary feed directive, a lot of that record keeping has to happen just through having a veterinary feed directive issue in place. So we don't worry much about that feed directive. I'll just kind of click through that. What drugs are affected? I think this is the challenge. I'm not going to go through these drugs exactly, but we have a lot of different products that we've always used in our animal health industry. And we see fewer and fewer of those products available to us or tighter regulations on those products. And many of those products that we no longer use or are no longer available to us had analogs or close similar products in the human health industry. So the concern is if we continually use those antibiotics in the animal health industry, we're going to create resistance and no longer have those products available on the human health side. So many of these products that we have continue to be a challenge, especially products that have like chlortetracycline, Oxytet. These are products that have a similar product in the human health side. but so those types of things are going to be an issue, right? So as we move forward, using those products that we have available to us is pretty important. Record keeping is something I'm kind of clicking. You guys, you don't need to get the full load today. We'll try it. It's Friday afternoon, right? Everybody's got somewhere else they need to be, but we'll talk about some of these cattle identification. You know, having some, especially identifying those animals that have been treated, mainly from a standpoint of any animal that's been treated to make sure we follow the withdrawal guidelines for that product. We can identify which animals have been treated, and then making sure if we've got other people at the operation, they know which animals have been treated. So that's through tagging and through record keeping that we keep track of those types of animals. Keeping those treatment records, and I've got a couple of examples. We need to keep all treatment records for at least 2 years on animals. So anytime we treat those animals, we need to hang on to those records as well. Here's just some examples. So everybody probably has a red book. There's the ability to keep treatment records for individual cattle in your red book. That's one of the pages towards the back that you can utilize. That's probably about as entry level as you can get. There's computer record keeping systems that are out there. Examples of that, you can keep track of that online, and there's lots of different herd management software programs that are out there that are available. This is what we used to use at the university. So we've got a research feedlot at Lingle. We do lots of research projects. We feed efficiency test bulls. We feed out and finish fed cattle for our cattle, as well as we work with other entities. North Dakota State, we finish a lot of cattle for North Dakota State at our facility. So for us to manage cattle and to have cattle on property, we are audited or we are checked by the IACUP, which is Animal Care and Use Committee. So anytime we have animals on research programs, they have to be audited and checked and making sure that we're following protocols and that we're taking care of our animals, which means I'm audited twice a year by a veterinarian. He comes in. I have to have individual records for every animal that's on my property. And I also he goes through what has gotten us more times than not is they go through all of our cabinets, we get written up for any expired products that are still in our cabinet. And that's gotten us more than once because it's amazing how long you can leave something. Heck, I've probably got a can of green beans in my house that's been there since 2007, right? So it's, you know, all of those types of things are things that we look at. But so we used to we call these cattle cards. So every animal had a 5x8 card that basically listed, when it came in, we listed all the information, put its tag number on. Every time we treated that animal, we kept those records. And so we've got 3 ring binders, just stacks of them on all of the different cattle, and we had to have individual records for every single animal. What we got to is not everybody filled those out. That's been kind of a challenge. And so making sure these cards were filled, a lot of times we could get them to write it on the chalkboard in the processing barn or on the dry erase board. You knew which ones were treated, but getting it finally entered in this form has been a challenge. You know, and it becomes an issue if we got somebody else feeding on the weekend. They need to know if an animal was treated so we don't retreat that animal or double treat that animal, right? So all of those things are important. What we've gone to now is, I'm not trying to promote anybody, but we've got, it's called Performance Beef. This is a software program. It used to be, well, it was bought by Zoetis. So Zoetis now owns this software. It was designed, it's called Performance Beef. It's been designed for small feedlots, like growing yards, small feed yards. So it's got all of the tools in there. It's not quite as, I guess, in-depth as some of the large feedlots would use. But here you can see I've got a bunch of bulls. We've got 16 pins of bulls on test right now. We've got them all listed in here. It helps us assign. We've got all of our cows listed in here. So this does all of our feed delivery. And at the bottom down here, we've got all of our animal health listed in it too. So now we enter all of that information in our animal health. So we've got all of our calves, all of our cows in the system, all of our herd bulls, and then any bulls that are on test are listed by pin down here. And basically all of that information is entered. And so every pin has a withdrawal status on it. So anytime that information is entered, this withdrawal times are a part of that. So green means that animal, any animal from that pin can be shipped. it'll show up as red if something's been treated and we haven't met that withdrawal time yet. So we're using this system. The nice thing about this system, everybody can do it on their phone and it's instantly updated. So everybody gets the new information and all automatically appears on their phone. So that's kind of what we've gone to now. It's helped us with billing, it's helped us with feed inventory, and it's helped us with our animal health side of things too. All right, so those are all examples. Did that. All right, feed records, again, those are like our injectable records. We need to keep those for 2 years, maintain those. All of that information, and that's part of the veterinary feed directive as well. So we have to maintain and keep those records for 2 years. I'm not going to go into, but again, we talked about this, part of BQA is cattle handling. That's part of, how do we eliminate and reduce the amount of bruising? That's a big part or a big cost to our industry. In 2016, it was estimated that bruising could cost the industry about $117 million just in carcass trim. So any animal that has carcass trim, basically as it comes through the processing facility, anything that's discolored, or has a bruise is automatically trimmed off of that carcass. And it ends up going in a trim pile, which probably goes to pet food or something like that, or we decrease the value of that pretty dramatically, and it's no longer a part of the carcass weight. It ends up as trim.
Steve, was that 117 million, is that just for that year?
Yes, for 1 year, correct. Yep, that's for 1 year.
Do you know what it is now?
So it's about the same. Bruising, unfortunately, the size of bruising, so the large bruises have kind of gone away. We've, for the most part, reduced the number of horned cattle, some of those things that we changed our handling, but the number of bruises has not changed. And that's where we were talking about maybe processing facilities or cattle trucks, because the size of our cattle have changed. Some of those, we're still finding bruising to some extent. When we were at that plant in Idaho, they showed us, and they called them windows, but they had about I would say probably 20 to 25% of those carcasses all had big bruises around their hip bones. And they have to trim all of that out. So you end up with this, what they call a window, where basically that whole side of that carcass is trimmed out, and it's probably a 1 square foot area, and all of that's trimmed out. And again, it's those animals catching their hip bones on corrals or sharp corners or trucks or whatever when they're going in and out. And it's still a problem from the industry standpoint. Animal well-being continues to be an issue, and it's that public perception, right, and that consumer confidence that we're good stewards of the animals that we take care of. I'll just kind of quickly talk about this adopted statement of principles, and I think this is important that we think about it. It's kind of a talking point, but it's just something that I think if we believe in BQA and we believe in producing safe and wholesome beef, we believe in the humane treatment of farm animals, and that we believe in continued stewardship of all of our resources, not only the animals we manage, but our land and our water resources that we have. We believe that cattle are healthier and probably more productive when good husbandry practices are used. I believe that my generation, as well as future generations, will benefit from the ability to sustain and conserve our natural resources. So I think that's probably one of the bigger issues right now, is that we hear about carbon footprint and the amount of methane that our cows produce and what impact we're having on the streams and all of that type of thing. And while we're all good stewards, and obviously if we're still in the industry, we're good stewards of our land, we're good stewards of the livestock that we produce. It's our ability to communicate that and express the fact that we're maintaining and conserving those resources, I think, is important to us as an industry. I will support research efforts focused on total production systems that are more efficient and promote animal well-being. I believe it is our responsibility to pursue a safe and wholesome product. And this last one, I think, we believe humans have the right to use agricultural animals, and that those humans have a responsibility to care for those animals in their charge. We are responsible for those cattle. Those cattle are a big part of our productivity and our livelihood. It's in our best interest that those animals remain healthy and productive, right? But how do we communicate that relationship to people that their only experience with an animal is their pet dog or their pet cat? How do we communicate that relationship? I think that continues to be a challenge to us as an industry. Cattle handling is a part of that. We won't go into usually that's where we can get into quite a talk about, you know, what tools we use, what we use. I think all of them are effective. I brought all of the examples in here. Obviously, we don't have a large herd at the station, but what cattle we do have, we work them a lot, right? We bleed cows once a week. We manage stuff, so they're all the time going through our facilities. And so we all have impressions of it. You know, all of these are different tools that we have out there, flags, whips, all of them I think are good tools, can be used effectively. My big pet peeve, I tell everybody, probably the whole state knows of it now, but rattle paddles. I hate rattle paddles. I don't mind the visual barrier. I don't mind a silent paddle. I'm fine with a silent paddle, but rattle paddles just drive me crazy. So the minute my crew shows up with one, I've got to drill and I take all the pellets out. But that's probably my pet peeve, and I've had people argue with me about it that they don't have any problem with it. And I guess that's fine. I just don't like to listen to them. Prods are good. Again, they're not weapons, right? As long as we can remember they're not weapons. And I think even electric prods, we talk about that, and obviously we're discouraged from using them. But, you know, we work cattle where we bleed them every week. We've got bulls on test that we weigh them all of the time. We're constantly running them through them. We're clipping them. We're ultrasounding them. We're fertility testing them. Those bulls come through the chute all of the time. And you get to a point where you're wringing a tail on something and they're not moving and you're twisting that tail so hard and you're wondering, it would probably make more sense if we get that animal headed in the right direction, make sure it's pointed the right way, and you bump them and you use it judiciously and effectively. I think sometimes that's better than twisting the tail off of something. So I think they all have their place. They all have their use. They can all be abused as well. But I think, you know, having those discussions with your processing crew or your working crew, your new hires, hopefully you can do that in a calm situation, in a calm setting, not yelling and screaming at each other and the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour and everybody's got their tail in the air.
Here in Sheridan, it doesn't blow that much here.
Right, that's right. You guys are a lot greener than we are right now, too. It looks nice up here. But, you know, all of those things are important. Talking about working facilities, how can you redesign or how can you improve a facility so cattle will flow through them? Removing shadows, taking that sweatshirt that's hanging in the wrong place or a chain that's dangling in the wrong space. All of those types of things are things that we kind of look at and address, making sure we kind of fix those types of things. I found out the other day I was trying to ultrasound bulls by myself, and so we've got a processing barn. I could not, so I had the lights off. It was hotter than heck, and I want to turn the overhead lights on. They wouldn't go into that processing barn until I turned the lights on, because there was enough of a contrast between outside and inside. I could not get them in there, so I wouldn't turn the lights on. Walked right in, right? So little goofy things like that, make sure we address them. You know, talking about flight zone, point of balance, how we get animals to respond to us. All of those things are important. Selecting animals for temperament. I had a big discussion. So I went up and trained all of the padlock crew here a couple of weeks ago, and we got into a big discussion about temperament. Because there's this perception, especially if you talk to, you know, the southeastern guys, these 25 head herds, these guys that are out there kicking them every day and scratching their backs and all of that kind of thing. And, you know, their expectation on temperament is completely different than a ranch that maybe only processes those cows once a year. They get preg tested once a year, and that's about it, right? So those expectations on temperament are two different things. So how do we effectively communicate that? I think it's unique to every operation, and I think there are benefits to finding those calm animals, right? That's a selection tool. We know that highly excitable animals are more easily stressed. So we know that they're harder to load. They not only are more prone to injury themselves, but they're more prone to injure people working them. We know that highly stressed animals have reduced growth rates, reduced feed intake, they tend to be hesitant to come to the bunk, lower marbling scores, they have a lower response to vaccination. All of these things are associated with highly excitable cattle. So there probably are more reasons to select for the things. We also know that highly excitable cattle tend to have an increased shear force or tougher meat. They tend to have higher amounts of carcass trim, probably due to bruising. Higher incidence of dark cutters. We don't have as much issues with dark cutters, but that's basically an animal that's been stressed so much that it's been off feed and water longer than the other animals. So when it's transported long distances, we get those dark colors. So I think there are reasons for that, to select or at least to think about temperament. All of those things we can estimate docility or temperament. It's the one that we obviously know the few that when we're tagging the calves or we're running them through the chute, all of those that try to eat your lunch, obviously, right? But there's ways to estimate all of that. There can be extremes, right? This is probably some extremes of docility. We sometimes don't want to try and work those cattle through the facility either, right? These are my kids. They're a lot older than that now, but these are some of theirs. How do we reduce stress? So that's part of BQA as well. And I think it can be simple as, you know, 3 things. Cattle want us to be able to see you. Cattle want to be able to go around you. Cattle want to be able to go and be with other cattle. So how do we use that to our benefit? All of those things are important to think about as we process cattle. How can we do it in a calm, efficient manner, right? So we've done cattle handling workshops, and I've done them with a lot of different experts and people, and we've talked about it. You know, the idea of working cattle slowly, people get offended by that. It's like, well, we've got to get cattle worked. We've got to get them processed. And you can't just slow everything down to a halt. I think that's a relative term, right? We also know that you got to stop and fix vents and repair the panels and some of those things that can slow you down as well, right? Or drag off the broken-legged one and that kind of thing. All of those things are issues, you know. We can hopefully find a compromise in there and communicate that to our employees, right? Transporting cattle, as we talked about, that is now we are requiring more and more truck drivers to have a Bqa certification in trucking. That's an interesting group to have a Bqa training. Let me just tell you right there. That's kind of interesting. All of these types of things we can talk about. This is probably one of the more popular bumper stickers that we've ever had with BQA. It's a real simple one that basically shows you the size of the trailer and the weight of the cattle, just a rough estimate of how many animals you should put in that trailer. What's the appropriate number? Just simple things like that, making sure we don't overload or underload the trailer. All of those things are important. Kind of watching heat stress and cold stress. Can we minimize stress on an animal when we haul that animal, or some of those types of things. Last thing we'll kind of talk about is this idea of market cows and bulls. We know that's a big segment and a big part of our industry. You know, from a cow-calf producer standpoint, it's probably about 20% of our receipts as cull cows and open cows, cows that we market, other than weaned calves. Pretty big part of our operation. So how do we address that, and how do we improve the quality of our cull animals that we're trying to market? True or false? Most beef from cull cows is used as ground beef.
Not so much anymore.
No, that's right. So that's actually false. All of the cow processing plants process those animals as whole muscle cuts, just like they would any other place. So we see those end up in a lot of unusual places. And in all honesty, if that cow has maybe gone into a feedlot and we've improved so some of the issues with cull cows is they're extremely lean. Sometimes we need lean to add to our ground beef. That's fine. And a lot of times those cows coming straight off the range have a pretty yellow fat color, and that's undesirable from an industry standpoint. But if that cow is dry lotted for 80 to 90 days on a high grain diet, we get some marbling and some fat back on that animal. It's a pretty good quality product. So, you know, we can add value to cull cows and make that a marketable product as well. But we know that's false. A lot of cows, those are still processed as whole muscle cuts for steaks, roast beef, Arby's. All of those are examples of that as well. The idea is we're trying to market those cull cows before they have an impact on our industry. So the idea being, my take home to that is not trying to get one more calf out of that cow. We know that she's lame. We know that she's got a bad eye developing. We know that she's got an issue. Let's not maybe try and hold her back one more year. Let's try and market her when we still have a saleable product that has a smaller blemish on us when we market those animals. Body condition score, we won't go into that. That's something that's kind of be discussed throughout the afternoon here today. Do we treat an animal? Do we market an animal, or euthanize? You know, one of the big things that we're dealing with now is how do we manage downer cows that are unable to get up. We know that that's illegal to take that animal to a processor. They cannot legally process a downer animal. So we have to minimize the number of those. So what do we do with that animal? How do we properly euthanize that animal? These are all discussions, and these are all things available through BQA that kind of lead into that discussion and help you make some of those management decisions. Big discussion, how do we transport a downer animal? All of those things, especially feedlots that are highly visible. I know as a research feedlot at the station, some of the things I do, you wonder how other people interpret some of the things that we do. I tell everybody I live north of Wheatland. We've got about 8 miles of pasture that are along I-25, that are frontage along I-25. We've got about 8 sections along I-25, and a lot of our water there. And when I've got a crippled cow or a down cow or a sick calf, and we're out there treating it right along the interstate, you kind of wonder how all of those Colorado people driving by are thinking what we're doing, how we're managing that. Are we doing it humanely, and are we being respectful to that cow? And I mean, all of those things kind of go through my mind as I hear people honking at me as they're going by, some of those types of things. So I think these are all things that we think about as an industry. How do we properly euthanize an animal? What's the caliber so where do we aim? What's the caliber we use? This is all information that are available through BQA, and that's information that's available in that manual that you have, all right? All right, biosecurity is a part of that as well. We won't dwell on that as much, but we talk about that, making sure that we clean our equipment. I think about it a lot. I do a lot of county fairs, and I like to try and clean my ultrasound equipment, especially if I'm doing a lot of lands and if we're worried about fungus and we're worried about a lot of these things. Making sure I clean my equipment. I think people see me clean it, and that makes them feel more comfortable with what I'm doing. But we know it's important to feed lots and processing facilities, all of those types of things. Other tools that we have are on-farm assessments. I didn't bring any. I brought some feedlot assessment tools with me today, but these are other tools that help you go evaluate and look at your facilities and think of some things that can be changed or improved on your operation. All right, takeaway message. We talked about this producer code. How do we go through? It's the idea that we're trying to provide and improve consumer confidence in the products that we're producing. We're trying to provide a safe and wholesome product to the consumer. We want to do that through a number of preventative practices. That's through, managing our vaccines effectively, looking at our processing facilities and managing cattle humanely and calmly through our facilities, keeping updated records, making sure we're minimizing stress when we work cattle. All of these are preventative measures that we do to improve beef quality assurance. All right, we'll end with a quiz here. I don't know where I'm at on time. I feel like I did a little better today. Oh yeah, we're not bad at all. We beat the hour-and-a-half mark. All right, first question. This is open to everybody. You have to answer it before we move on. So it gets really awkward if everybody's silent. So we have to answer these as we go. Number one, the purpose of Bqa program is to ensure a safe, wholesome product and protect consumer confidence. How many times have I said that today? Probably 15, right? So if you got anything out of that, that's right. That's true. Ultimate goal of Bqa program is to maintain profitability, increase the number of choice carcasses, to allow traceability of individual animals, or to maximize consumer confidence in beef. Hint, I think I've said it a few times, right? Hopefully those other things are happening as well, right? We want to focus on improving consumer confidence, but a lot of these Bqa principles do those other things as well. They improve profitability. Hopefully we've got healthier animals. We increase the number of choice carcasses. We reduce or eliminate stress. We allow traceability, and we have individual animal identification. Those are all important. What will cattle managed through Bqa be less likely to contain? Violated residues, injection site blemishes, foreign metal, or all of the above? All of the above. An intermuscular injection should be given in front of the shoulder, in the rump, cringe, or in the elbow region, or A and B. So my pet peeve, Shelby's waiting for me to say it, but my big pet peeve is giving shots in the hip, and she's grinning because she knew I couldn't hold off. I had to do it. A lot of our AI technicians and a lot of our guys that are synchronizing cattle still like to give those shots in the hip, and that's probably my biggest issue. Is that's probably one area we continue to see shots given in the hip. So that's I'm going to get in trouble one of these days for continually talking about it. But that's one of them. Number 5. Maintaining a valid veterinary client-patient relationship should be an integral part of Bqa. True? True. Disabled and downer cattle are not allowed in the food chain and should be transported to a livestock marketing facility, B, marketed directly to a harvest facility, or C, humanely euthanized. Yeah, humanely euthanized. Number 7, strict adherence to a pharmaceutical label directions, correct dosage and route of administration, and accurate record keeping are integral to producing beef free of residues. True or false? True. All right. Down to the last few. Judicious use of antibiotics dictates that efforts be made to select the best antibiotic for a particular disease treatment and that it be used according to the label. That's pretty true. That's true. Extra label drug use can be prescribed only by a veterinarian. So that's C. I'll get that out there. I don't want to get any misinterpretation of that. You need to work with your veterinarian.
I was gonna call you.
So, okay, don't ask me. Proper training of those who handle cattle should include the following topics: understanding point of balance, understanding feeding and nutrition, proper use of handling and restraining devices, how to diagnose common illnesses, or all of the above. All of the above. Yep. All right. Bonus. The Beef Quality Assurance Program is driven by consumers, producers, government, or all of the above. First slide was producers, right? It's a producer-driven program that's been voluntary, that's education-based, and I appreciate everyone's time today. And if you've got any questions, I'll be around.